Hey folks, it's November 27th on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. Just got back from Lowe's. I want to share with you some thoughts on ways to save money by using your correct lighting. How to change a floodlight, as you can see here. This one's been up in my house since we moved in here in 2013. Don't use it much because of how much wattage it requires. This is a 90 watt floodlight. So if you left this on 24 hours a day, it costs 2.16 kilowatt hours of light a day. You're obviously not going to do that, and I hope you don't do that. 2.16 kilowatt hours a day doesn't sound like much if you're averaging 10 cents a kilowatt hour, but over day after day after day, that can be expensive. So what I did is I just got back from Lowe's, and instead I got these floodlight replacements, which are all of 13 watts. 13 watts. Now these are LED lights, so it costs for these two cost about 13 bucks, 14 bucks. I do get a military discount at Lowe's, which is nice, but it's still 13 bucks for a two lights isn't cheap. But a 13 watts means if I left this guy on for 24 hours, it only run me about 1/3 of a kilowatt hour per day. 2 kilowatt hours per day, 1/3 of a kilowatt hour per day, which means I'd be more inclined to leave this on. Now there is some debate in energy circles when we use less utility, less electricity, if people actually use less, or if they use more to compensate for the fact that they're using less kilowatt hours. I think they call it replacement amount, that's not the word, but something like that. And so if I have 13 kilowatts, or 1/3 of 1 kilowatt hour a day, I'm probably more inclined to let this guy run. Again, I hardly ever use this. I'm sorry, 90 watts, 2 kilowatt hours a day. Just, I can't see doing that. But if I'm only using 1/3 of one a day, I'll be more inclined to let this guy run. And who knows the usage we'll get out of this. But at the end of the day, one of the easiest ways to save money is to look at your lights that you have outside. The floodlights. This is just one light. If I had 10 of these guys, each running 24 hours a day, that's 2 kilowatt hours a day per. If I had 10 of these guys, that's 21 kilowatt hours a day. Even if you only ran it 12 hours, that's 10 kilowatt hours a day. My family as a whole, we got 6 of us in this pretty big house that we have here. We use about 60 kilowatt hours a day. So just your lights alone. If you were to run these guys 24 hours a day and you had multiple floodlights, you would be using a lot of electricity, lots of electricity. Don't do that, obviously. Floodlights that are LED can save you a whole lot of money, and especially if you think of the outdoor fixtures that you have above your garage, for instance. Each of those guys can run you hundreds of dollars over the course of your lifetime. Reduce those usage by either turn them off, but you don't want to turn them off. And one of the reasons that you have them is for safety. It does have a nice little look to it too. If you have a nice little garage lights over your garage, but for safety, light keeps people away who might want to do ill will to your home. But at the end of the day, the cost of just a regular incandescent light bulb can be through the roof. Yes, they are cheap. I get that. But if you're running them quite a bit, 12 hours a day, probably at night on the lights above your garage, the lights outside your front, if you're using floodlights, if you have a backdoor light, anything like that, you got to get the LEDs. Pay a little bit more up front, but for a lot of savings in the background. Anyway, I just replaced these guys. They're looking pretty good up there. Actually, I got to turn them off. Yikes. Left them on here, but I just replaced them, so no big deal. But anyway, hope this helps. But remember, kilowatt hours, watts equals kilowatt hours, which equals what your utility bill is. Each light has its own cost on top of the purchase price, but the usage as well. Reduce your lights costs, and you can reduce the energy used and reduce the bill that you pay. All right, hope this helps. See ya.